It is somewhere past 3 in the morning. You are on your back, and your eyes are open. The room is that specific dark that isn't really dark, because your phone charges on the nightstand, and a little light bleeds under the door. You have been awake for maybe 40 minutes. You don't know the exact time, and you refuse to check, because checking makes it worse, and you already know it is bad. Your body is heavy, your mind is not. It has picked one thought, a small stupid one, and it is turning it over and over like a stone. You do the math on how many hours are left before the alarm. The number is cruel. You tell yourself to sleep, which is the one command sleep has never once obeyed, and underneath all of it runs a quiet, cold certainty that something in you is broken. Almost everyone has been in that exact room. The staring, the math, the low dread. We treat it as a private failure, a malfunction of a modern body that should be running smoothly. So here is the question this whole thing turns on. Did ancient humans lie awake in the middle of the night too? Did some hunter 10,000 years ago stare up at the roof of a shelter at what we would call 3 in the morning, wide awake, waiting? Short answer, yes, almost certainly yes. But here is the strange part, and it is stranger than you are expecting. Their version of lying awake in the dark was almost nothing like yours. It probably didn't come with dread. It wasn't a symptom. For most of human history, waking in the deep middle of the night was not a problem to be solved. It was simply a part of the night, a normal, expected, sometimes even treasured part. The thing you experience as a glitch may be one of the oldest and most human things you do. Let me be careful here, because this is easy to overstate, and I want to earn your trust rather than sell you something. The claim is not that ancient people never suffered, never worried, never lay awake sick with fear about a hungry winter or a sick child. Of course they did. The claim is narrower and, I think, more interesting. It's about the shape of the night itself, the structure of sleep, and the evidence for it is not a vibe or a guess. It comes from dusty court records, from a sleep laboratory in Maryland, and from firesides in the Kalahari Desert. Later I will show you an experiment where scientists took ordinary modern people and gave them ancient nights. Within weeks, with no instruction at all, their sleep quietly cracked into 2 clean pieces, with a strange calm space in the middle. Nobody told them to do it. Their bodies just remembered. To see how far we have drifted, we have to start with a man who spent decades reading the mail of the dead. His name is Roger Ekirch. He is a historian at Virginia Tech, and in the 1980s and 90s, he was doing something that sounds almost unbearably tedious. He was researching the history of night, not a war, not a king, just the night, the ordinary hours after dark, across pre-industrial Europe and America. He read diaries and letters. He read court depositions, doctor's notes, prayer manuals, poems, and the transcripts of criminal trials. And over the years, a phrase kept surfacing that made no sense to a modern reader. People kept writing about their first sleep. Not their sleep, their first sleep, as if there were an obvious second one. A woman in a court record describes waking after her first sleep to check on something. A doctor advises that the best time to conceive a child is after the first sleep, when both partners are rested. A prayer book offers verses for the wakeful hour between sleeps. At first, Ekirch thought it was a fluke, a quirk of one writer. Then he found it again, and again. By the time he was done, he had gathered more than 500 references across many centuries and many languages, all describing the same thing. People slept in 2 shifts. Here is how it worked. You went to bed not long after dark because there was little else to do and light was precious. You slept hard for perhaps 3 or 4 hours. This was your first sleep. Then, somewhere in the deep middle of the night, you woke. Not with a jolt, not in a panic. You simply surfaced, naturally, the way the tide comes in. And you stayed awake for an hour, maybe 2. This waking was so ordinary, it had its own name in different tongues. Then, when the wakefulness had run its course, you lay back down for your second sleep and slept on until dawn. Ekirch laid all of this out in his 2005 book, At Day's Close, Night in Times Past. And the detail that stays with you is not that the gap existed, but what people did inside it. They did everything. The wakeful hour was quiet, low-lit, and deeply human. People prayed, and there were manuals written specifically for these prayers, because the church understood this hour existed. People had sex, and physicians recommended it then, calling it more pleasurable and more likely to succeed after the rest of the first sleep. Couples lay in the dark and talked, turning over the day, the plans, the small griefs they hadn't spoken aloud by daylight. People got up and tended the fire, stirred the embers, added a log. Some rose to check on animals or on a sick relative. Some sat by the low flames and simply thought. A few, records show, climbed out of bed and went to visit the neighbors, wandering the sleeping village in the dark. There were even reports of people committing petty crimes in that hour, which tells you how genuinely awake and active they were. And then, without drama, they went back to sleep. Sit with how alien that is to us. Nobody in these accounts is panicking. Nobody is doing the math on lost hours. Nobody lies there gripped by the certainty that they are broken. The middle of the night waking was not a symptom of anything. It was a room in the house of the night, and everybody knew where the door was. So what happened to it? Why does the phrase first sleep sound like a foreign language to you when it was common speech for your ancestors just a few centuries ago? The answer, mostly, is light. Artificial, controllable, cheap light. For almost all of human history, when the sun went down, the world went genuinely dark, and staying up meant burning something expensive. As street lighting spread through cities in the 17th and 18th centuries, and especially once gas and then electric light arrived, the night stopped being a wall and became a frontier. You could push bedtime later and later. The evening, once a dead zone, became a place to live. And as bedtime slid toward midnight, the whole two-part structure got compressed. The wakeful gap got squeezed out. The two sleeps were shoved together into one solid block, crammed into the shrinking hours before the factory whistle. Because that is the other half of the story, the industrial clock. Before factories, time was loose and local, measured by the sun and the season. The factory demanded something new. It demanded that you be at a specific place, at a specific hour, rested and ready, every single day. Sleep became a thing to optimize. 8 solid hours in one unbroken piece so you could sell the other 16. The two-shift night wasn't outlawed. It was simply crowded out and then forgotten until a phrase like first sleep became a puzzle a historian had to decode. Now, a good historian is careful, and so should we be. 500 references across old documents prove that people talked about 2 sleeps and lived that way. But writing is not biology. On its own, Ekirch's mountain of evidence could describe a cultural habit, a fashion of the night, something learned rather than built into us. What we would really want is to take a human body, strip away the electric light and the industrial clock, and see what the body does on its own. Which is exactly the experiment somebody ran. His name is Thomas Wehr, and in the early 1990s, he was a scientist at the National Institute of Mental Health. Wehr was interested in a simple, radical question. Modern humans live bathed in artificial light late into the evening. What would happen to our sleep if we gave the body a long winter night, the kind our species evolved under, with hours and hours of unavoidable darkness? So he built one. He took ordinary people and put them, for a stretch of weeks, into short photoperiod conditions. In plain terms, he gave them 14 hours of darkness every night. 14 hours with nothing to do but lie in the dark, the way a human being in a northern winter would have lived for tens of thousands of years before the candle, the lamp, the bulb. No screens, no reading lamp. Just the long dark. At first, the participants slept enormously, paying off a debt of tiredness most modern people carry without knowing it. But once they were rested, once the backlog was cleared, something remarkable happened. Their sleep did not settle into one long block. It split. On its own, with no instruction, their sleep divided into 2 segments. They would sleep for several hours. Then they would wake and lie quietly awake for a couple of hours in the middle of the night. Then they would fall back into a second sleep until morning. Wehr had reconstructed, in a modern lab with modern volunteers, the exact pattern Ekirch had dug out of centuries-old documents. The first sleep and the second sleep reappearing spontaneously the moment the body was returned to something like ancient conditions. But the most beautiful finding is not the split, it is what the body did during the gap. Wehr measured what was happening biochemically in that wakeful middle stretch, and he found that his subjects' levels of a hormone called prolactin rose and stayed elevated through it. Prolactin is associated with states of deep calm, with the still, contented drowsiness you might feel while resting quietly, a body at peace and not on alert. The participants themselves didn't describe the waking as distressing, they described it as pleasant. A meditative, restful, almost trance-like state of quiet wakefulness, not lying there fighting to sleep, lying there, awake, and serene. Read that against your own 3 a.m. Same clock, same darkness, same wide-open eyes in the middle of the night. But one body is flooded with a hormone of calm and rests inside the waking like a warm bath. The other is doing frantic arithmetic and drowning in dread. The waking might be nearly identical. What we have bolted onto it could not be more different. This is the first of the 2 ideas I really want to lodge in your head. That middle-of-the-night waking you have been taught to fear as insomnia may not be a malfunction at all. It may be the ghost of your first sleep ending, exactly as it was designed to, right on time, in a body that no longer has any idea what the gap is for. The rhythm is ancient and intact. What's missing is the room it used to open into and the calm that used to fill it. So let's ask what that room was actually for, because the middle of the night was not just an empty pause between 2 sleeps. In many human societies, it was part of something larger, something the darkness itself made possible. And to see that, we have to leave the sleep lab and sit down by a fire. In 2014, an anthropologist named Polly Wiesner from the University of Utah published a study in the journal PNAS that at first glance sounds almost too simple to be science. She studied conversation. Specifically, she studied the conversations of the Jew Hoansi, sometimes called the Kung, a hunter-gatherer people of the Kalahari Desert, whose way of life offers one of our best living windows onto how humans lived for most of our history. Wiesner had decades of recordings and notes on what these people actually talked about. And she did something nobody had quite done. She sorted the conversations by time of day. What she found was that daytime talk and firelit night talk were almost two different languages. During the day, in the bright practical hours, conversation was mostly business. People talked about economics, about foraging, about who had what and who owed whom. They gossiped, they complained, they argued and negotiated and criticized each other. Daytime talk was the machinery of survival and the friction of living close together, all sharp edges and practical stakes. It was the talk of getting through the day. Then the sun went down, the fire was lit, and the talk transformed. Wiesner found that roughly 81% of the long conversations that happened at night, by firelight, were stories, not logistics. Not gossip, stories, tales of journeys to distant places, accounts of people who were far away or long dead, myths, the doings of ancestors and spirits, the talk of the imagination. At night, around the fire, the human mind stopped negotiating and started traveling. It went to places the body could not go, to people the eyes could not see, into the past and the impossible and the far away. Think about what fire did here. Fire extended the day at both ends, stealing hours back from the dark. But it did not simply give people more daylight-style hours to keep working and arguing. It created a completely different kind of time. A pool of warm light in an ocean of dark, where the practical mind could finally rest and the storytelling mind could wake. The night was not just when humans slept. The night, and the fire that pushed back against it, was where a huge part of our inner life, our myths and our shared imagination and our sense of a world beyond the visible, was actually built. This is the second idea I want you to hold. Night, for ancient humans, was not merely the off switch. Firelight turned it into a special room, a space set aside from the harsh economics of daylight, given over to story, to closeness, to the imagination. When your distant ancestors lay half awake in the dark, or sat up in the wakeful gap between their two sleeps, this is often the world they surfaced into. Low flames, a voice telling a story. The people they loved close by in the dark. The night had a texture, and that texture was warm. But I have been describing the night as if it were only cozy, and that would be a lie. The night was also, for almost all of human history, genuinely dangerous. And that danger points us to one of the deepest and most surprising reasons your body still wakes when it does. Picture a small band of humans, deep in the past, lying down to sleep in the open or in a shallow shelter. The dark around them is not empty. It holds predators that hunt by night, big cats and other animals for whom a sleeping human is simply food. It holds rival groups. It holds the ordinary hazards of a fire that might spread or die, of a child that might wander, of a snake in the dark. To be asleep is to be defenseless. And to have your entire group asleep all at once, deeply, for 8 unbroken hours, is to be a band of easy prey lying still in the night. For a social animal in a dangerous world, unbroken group sleep is a terrible strategy. Scientists have a name for the way evolution might have solved this. It's called the sentinel hypothesis. The idea, first raised decades ago by a researcher named Frederick Snyder, is elegant and a little haunting. If a group sleeps in a staggered, uneven way, with individuals drifting in and out of light and deep sleep at different times, then at almost any given moment through the night, somebody is awake. Not standing guard on purpose, just by the natural scatter of everyone's sleep, someone's eyes happen to be open. A sleeping band becomes a band that is quietly, continuously watched over, without anyone being assigned the job. For a long time, this was a beautiful theory with little hard data. Then, in 2017, a team of researchers, including David Sampson, tested it against real human beings living something close to an ancestral life. They studied the Hadza, hunter-gatherers of Tanzania, and they measured the sleep of a group over many nights, tracking who was awake and who was asleep across the dark hours. What they found was striking. Over roughly 220 hours of measured group sleep, the number of minutes in which every single adult was asleep at the same time was tiny, almost negligible. For the overwhelming majority of the night, at least one person in the band was awake or lightly stirring. The group was, in effect, guarded around the clock by no one and by everyone. And crucially, the people most reliably awake in the deep middle of the night were often the older members of the band. Not because they were assigned the watch, but because human sleep patterns shift with age, and the elders naturally woke earlier and slept lighter. There is an old, quiet dignity in that. The oldest people, less able to run and hunt in the day, may have been the ones whose wakeful nights kept everyone else alive. Their so-called insomnia was a gift to the group. Now bring all of this back to your own dark bedroom. Your body still expects the night to be dangerous. It still carries the ancient program that says total, Uninterrupted, defenseless sleep is a bad idea, that someone should surface now and then, that the deep middle of the night is a time to come up toward wakefulness and check that the world is still safe. When you jolt awake at 3 in the morning and feel that cold rush of alertness, some of that is not random. It is a body doing exactly what kept your ancestors alive, coming up to the surface, scanning the dark, ready to be the sentinel. In a band around a fire, that alertness had somewhere to go and something to do. It handed off to the next person. It watched over children. It sat by the flames. You are running that same 10,000-year-old program in a sealed room, alone, with a glowing clock counting your failure. The waking is ancient, the dread is new. So let me now say plainly the thing this whole story has been walking toward, because you have earned the full version of it. The modern experience of insomnia, the specific misery of waking at 3 in the morning and lying there in a spiral of anxiety, is very likely not a sign that your body is broken. In large part, it is the collision of an ancient, healthy, deeply normal rhythm with a modern world that has no place for it. Your ancestors' bodies split the night in two and woke in the gap, and Wehr showed that yours will do the same the moment you give it a long, dark night. Your ancestors woke to a warm room of firelight and story and people, and Wiesner showed us what filled that space. Your ancestors woke as sentinels in a guarded band, and Samson showed that the wakefulness kept the whole group safe. The waking was structural, it was expected. It was, in its way, sacred, a hinge in the night around which prayer and sex and story and watchfulness all turned. We took that waking, stripped it of its fire, its stories, its people, and its purpose, dropped it into a silent, solitary room, wired the room with electric light and glowing clocks, and then told ourselves that 8 unbroken hours in a single block is the only correct way to sleep, and that any deviation is a disease. So of course the waking still comes. The rhythm is older than agriculture, older than writing, older than almost everything we call civilization. What changed is not the waking. What changed is that we made it lonely, and then we made it frightening, and then we gave it a clinical name and lay there hating ourselves for it. I am not a doctor, and real, grinding, health-wrecking sleeplessness is genuinely worth taking to one, because not every sleepless night is ancient wisdom, and some of it is a body in real trouble. But there is something quietly freeing in knowing the history. The next time you surface at 3 in the morning, wide awake in the dark, you might remember that you are not malfunctioning. You are doing something your species has done around fires and in shelters and under long winter skies for longer than we have been anything we would recognize as ourselves. You are keeping the old watch. You are standing, for an hour, in the doorway of the first sleep and the second, in the room where humans once told their oldest stories. For almost all of human history, the thing you have been taught to experience as a malfunction was simply what the night was.